So many men in their 40s begin to start to worry about things that are overwhelming them, and they keep asking themselves this question when they wake up in the morning. It's like, ugh, what's the point in all this? And life becomes very sad and just a groundhog day. It feels like you're existing. Do you know someone that feels like that, or do you feel like that yourself? I know there's been times in my life where I felt like that, and you seem to do a lot more worrying about certain things and completely forget how to live life. You know, you should be paying attention to certain things, and it seems like it's impossible to do that. And there's reasons for this. In my experience, they're quite obvious to me because of the stage that I'm at now in my life and the things that I've learned in this field that I work in. And I'm going to do my best in this podcast to help you to feel a little bit better. Even though you can have many problems in your life and people are thinking, look, Paul, I've got loads of shit going on in my life, and there's just so much stuff I don't even know where to start. How can you actually make me feel better about that? And I'm worried about them all the time, and they're genuine. I do believe you. I'm never going to minimize your problems in any way. Everybody's got a lot of stuff going on, and even some people have a small few things going on in their life and they're overwhelmed by them. The smallest thing triggers them off. My goal in these podcasts is to loosen up how you look at the problems so that you can still have them there but feel less debilitated by them, you know? And when you do this, you will for sure have a better quality of life. And if you're interested, are you interested in being able to just feel a little bit better? And what have you got to lose? Just stick around and just listen to this, even if you're just listening to it in the background as you're going about your busy day, because a lot of people don't have time to actually sit down and educate themselves because they're too busy just trying to get through the day. Like most people's goals, if I can just get through the week, that's a bonus. If I can get through the day, that's a bonus. To ask them to try and squeeze a video in or, a training in to train themselves how to think better, it's just not feasible sometimes because people are just got too much noise going on. Now, if you do this and you start to listen to this stuff in the background, you're going to pick up ideas out of it and they will settle into your mind. And there's no rules to it. There's no principles. That's why I'm doing it in a podcast, because I feel, even for me, because I've got so much stuff to do and so much going on, I really find it difficult to be able to just pick a bit of time to sit down and focus all my attention on one thing. It's really hard to do. And I know for most people, it's impossible for them to do that, especially if people have kids and they've got a job and they're coming home and they're going to bed and they're exhausted and they wake up in the morning and then you throw something at them like, hey, here's a course you can do to make yourself feel better. It's like, how am I going to fit that in? So imagine that you've got your problems and you might have many of them. I'm just going to kind of simplify this in a concept. So this is going to be a concept. And take your time listening to this stuff. You don't want to be kind of rushing to this and go, Paul, get to the point. Just give me a quick fix. Life's much more sophisticated than that. Everything that you learned in life usually you went through a process and learning. So just give yourself a little bit of a break here and just go, you know what? I'm just going to listen to this guy and I'm just going to see what I can pick up out of it. And I'm not going to try and make myself remember all of it. I'm just going to just listen to it in the background and start to realize there's a completely different way of doing things. So here's a simple way to think about your problems. Imagine you've got a white page, like a piece of paper. Now, I'm not asking you to write anything down. I'm not asking you to get a piece of paper. This is just a concept. So if you had a piece of paper in front of you, right, and think about your worries and the problems that you have on, and maybe I know I'm just going to say 7. Say you've got 7 problems or 6 or 5. I know people have a lot more than that, if you wanted to write a list down. But just for argument's sake, just for the concept of this particular podcast, imagine your worries and you've got a white piece of paper in front of you. And I don't want you to write this down. Just listen, because you can do this kind of concept if you're just walking along. It's just an idea. Right, you're better off just holding these ideas in your mind instead of taking a bit of time out of your day to write stuff down and do all this stuff. Take this as a principle, as a concept. So you got a white page, and let's say you've got 7 problems that you kind of move from one to the other. Sometimes you're worried about this, and sometimes you're worried about that. And then you fix that, and then you've got this other thing that you worry about. You're always stuck on something. There's always one or two things that you're kind of constantly worrying about. And if that's not there, then something else shows up. So just for argument's sake, imagine you had a pencil and you got 7 small dots on the page, in the middle of the page. And they represent your problems. So you've got a pencil and you're just like that, and you make 7 dots on the page. Just imagine that as best you can, or just get a concept of it. Now look at all of the empty space around the dots, and just imagine that that empty space represents everything in your life that's not the problem. There's so much more white space there than there are dots. Now, I'm not minimizing your problems in any way, and I'm not saying that they're not there and they're not significant, because there is some problems in people's life where I'm even going, jeez, like, how are they coping with that? Now, think about the space, and think about everything even beyond the page, all the space. And there's even more stuff beyond that. So you've got these 7 little dots in the page, then you've got the page itself, and you've got all the space on the page, and you've got everything that's beyond the page. And this is just a simple way to look at things. You don't need to do anything special here with this idea. Just notice your problems are like these small dots. And while the rest of your life is kind of like that empty space around them. And most people only focus on their problems, the dots, and they forget about everything else, that empty space. And think about this. What if you could just accept the dots being there and still feel stressed about them when you're focused on them, while also paying attention to all the good things in your life? Because I'm noticing that, like, there's people they know there's good things in their life, but when you're stuck on the problem and you're thinking about it, it's almost like you forget in that moment. And the idea of this particular podcast is to remind you to include it. So if you've got all this space, and I tell you about the space on the page, if I had just asked you to put the 7 dots on the page and said, they're your problems, you'd be like, yeah, that's, there's more than that. I'd like to put 20 there. And then I say, okay, there's 20 dots and they represent your problems. If we went off and we had a conversation about that particular process, you probably more than likely wouldn't say to me, oh yeah, and then there was all of this space that we didn't talk about that was on the page that was much bigger than the dots. You wouldn't say that to me because I wouldn't have reminded you of it. But now, having the dots on the page, if we went off and had a conversation about that, you would have to think about that. Now, maybe we wouldn't talk about it, but it would be in your mind. And if I even asked you to forget about the space, you'd be like, oh, I can't forget about it. No, you're at the telling me to think about it, And that's what I'm trying to do with this concept is I know that everything else is still there. It can't not be. All the good things in your life are still there. But sometimes you can negate them and you can delete them and distort reality to the point where you are so focused on the problems that all of the other good stuff just gets completely deleted and disappears into the background. Now, when I'm working with someone and I say to them, think about your problem, do you know how easy it is for me to get them to feel better about that problem? I feel like I'm cheating here because I've got a massive advantage. Their attention is on the problem, and all I have to do is move their attention somewhere else. And when I get them to think about something that's not the problem, and I've got so much choice, you've got your life, you've got everything in your life, you've got your life in general, and you've got everything else in life that's not the problem. And in the universe, like, I've got so much stuff that I can move a person's attention to. And in that moment, they forget about the problems because they're paying attention to all the other stuff. And you'll see their state shift and you'll see their mood shifting because they're telling a story about this other thing that I get them to put their attention on. And while I have them paying attention to that, for that moment, they forget about their problems. Now, the problem is still there. And in that moment, what I'm doing is I'm creating choices. I'm saying, hey, how do you feel when you think about this? Oh, I feel much better. And then in that moment, I can say, so why don't you go back and think about the problem and forget about that? It almost feels like it's become a choice that they hadn't got before. Now, I could easily tell them to forget about the thing that was making them feel better, but they're like, I can't forget about it now, Paul, because you're at the telling me about it. It is there. And if I get them to start to pay attention to all the other things in their life, all of a sudden, if they start to include all the things in life and in life in general, in their life in general, even just some of the things, all of those things will always be bigger than the problem. Now, that's what your mind is looking for. Your mind is looking for perspective. It's looking for inclusion. It's like, is this problem big? And I would say yes. If you keep focusing on it, it's bigger than everything else. But if you're willing to include everything else, it can never be as big as you think it is. And once your mind gets the idea of that, it's like, oh, that makes more sense now. So it's not such a big deal. And your nervous system is listening to this kind of thinking. It's trying to put it into perspective and think, is this problem big? And you might say, this is a big deal, Paul, but compared to what? If you told someone else your problem that had much bigger problems, they'd be like, your problem's not that big compared to mine. And for them, their problem is bigger. But if I get them to say, if I ask them, how big is that problem compared to everything else that's not the problem? It's not that big in perspective. Now, this is just the way the mind process. I'm not trying to minimize anybody's problems in any way, because we need to resolve the problems. But if you forget about everything else, then the problem can be bigger than your whole life. And it's not. The only time people realize that the problem wasn't that big is when they get old and they're looking back in their life and they realize that the problem was there, but all the other things that were more important that were there too, and they forgot about it. So all I'm asking you to do is just consider this, or try not. Try to forget about it. So just think of the dot, and this is just a concept. It's just a metaphor. The page. You've got 7 dots on the page. The page is so much bigger than those few dots. And it can't not be, right? And your whole life is even bigger than that page. But sometimes people make their problems bigger than everything else. And I'm not minimizing them. They are a big deal and they need to be resolved. But if you can just get that feeling that they're not that big compared to everything else, then your mind will kind of take that into consideration, and your nervous system will start to go, oh, they're not that big. And now when you're in a better state and a better feeling, you make better decisions. Listen to this in the background. Just let it kind of be there, the idea of it. So there's no pressure on you to write this down or learn a technique. It's reality. It's a reality concept. It's not me making something up to make you feel better. It's actually reality. So I'm not asking you to change anything. Just consider this different way of looking at your situation and give your mind a bit of a break. Ease your mind into this, and include everything just as a concept. Like, your mind, when you're focused on something and you keep ruminating on it and thinking about it and focusing on it, is not aware that there's so much more that's not the problem. Give your mind a break and include everything else. Even just close your eyes and take a step back and see the bigger picture and see the world and see the planet and see the oceans and see sometimes I actually used to go up to the summit in Howth, and I'll tell you a quick story. I wasn't planning on doing this, but I was up in the summit of Howth one time, and I was walking the dog, and it was just a pretty weird experience. There's a bench up on the summit of Howth, and it's a little stone bench, and on the front of the bench it's engraved, and it says, see God in everything. And I used to like just going up there and sitting with the dog. I have a picture of all my dogs that I've had over the years just sitting in front of that bench overlooking the ocean. It's a massive big space, and the ocean and the sky, and you're on a big cliff, and there's a stone bench, and it's just beautiful up there, especially in the summertime. And one day I went up and I seen this, I was always waiting there's always somebody sitting on the bench, and you have to kind of wait for them to get up off it so you can sit down. And so kind of just pacing up and down with the dog. And I always wanted to have my little moment there where I could just sit on the bench and just anyway, there was this old lady, and she was really short, and she was this wide. She was about 80. And she was sitting on the bench with a big smile on her face. And we got talking, and she said, isn't it beautiful? And I said, yeah, it's incredibly, just a massive kind of space. It's nice and peaceful to sit up here. And we were talking, I can't remember what we were talking about, but I said, you look really happy. And she did. She looked like a really smiley old lady. I said, you look really happy. And she goes, oh, I am. I'm always like this. But I wasn't always like this. Up to 70, I was kind of worried about everything. And she said, one day I came up here and I sat on this bench. And she said, I come up here once a month and I sit here and I just sit here. And I said, are you thinking about anything? Because I'm always curious about people that are happy, what they're doing. I look for their strategy so that I can use it myself, but also share it with other people. And I said, what are you thinking about? Do you be thinking about anything? She goes, no. I said, not even like problems. How old are you? And she said, I'm 81. And you don't worry about anything. Used to do that. Just don't do it anymore. And no more worrying, I said, Margaret, no more worrying. And I was like, how do you do that? She says, I come up here once a month and I get all my problems and I put them out there. I imagine them all going out there into that space. And I just think they're not even that big. Like when you just put them out there, they feel less. And I was like, wow, she's doing a technique, but she doesn't know it's a technique. And she was thinking of her problems and she was putting them out into the space in front of her. And she was including all the spaciousness all around her as far as she could see. And in that moment, the mind went, oh, they're not that big. But if she didn't do that, the mind would never know. That's why I'm talking about this little page. It's like, it's just a concept. And if you want, you can go up to the summit and you can sit there or find a place where you can just, it's called Louis Peak, I think it's called. And my dog is called Louis, which is interesting. I was looking at it on the map one day. I think it's called Louis Peak. Louis Peak, yeah. And you just go up to the summit of Hout and you get out of the car and you walk around the cliff to the left, and then you keep walking and you see the stone bench and it says "See God" and everything. And I often go up there and I think about that old lady. Never seen her again. And she was putting things into perspective. Most people don't put things into perspective. So this video, or this audio, this podcast, it's a video as well, is just a concept. And I think that most of the reason why I don't feel stressed is because I'm aware that my problems ain't that big, no matter how big they are in comparison to everything else. And I would like you to take the same concept and idea and just include it in your life. Power of inclusion and the benefits of this, especially for men over 40, because they come to that midlife crisis just after 40 where they're coming up to 50 and they're thinking, geez, what am I going to be doing? Like, what have I done? Like, what could I have done? It just gets to that point where they start going down that slippery slope. And the benefits for this and adapting this concept of expansive thinking, you can call it expansive thinking. It's also known as perspective or inclusion or the bigger picture. You can call it anything you want. This mental shift will prevent you from being consumed by just the problems in your life. They are there. I will never negate them. I will never minimize them in any way. If you told me the problems you have, I'd be like, shit, that's bad. And it would be. But I'm like, despite having that problem, how do you want to feel about everything else in your life that's not that? If you're willing to include it or not, but try not to, because I'm talking about it now, you're going to have to go, oh shit, you know, and your mind's going to go, oh, you never told me about all this other stuff. I mean, you kind of touched on it a little bit sometimes, but you never really like sat with it and go and thought about it. And again, our goal in this podcast, and by our goal, I mean me and you, because you have to take some responsibility for this as well, you know, to implement it in your life. It's not all on me. I'm just sharing what I know. I know it works because I'm talking the talk, I'm walking the walk. And when I do this with people, I can help people to feel much better about problems that are like debilitating them, because I know how to, I'm cheating, because I've got everything else that's not the problem that I can move their attention to. And once we loosen that up and we loosen up their model of the world and we get them to start to include everything else, they naturally can start to pick up, I know what you're doing here, Paul. I can see what you're doing here. I'm going to do this myself. So it's the goal for this, for me and you. Remember, this is on you as well, is to prevent yourself from forgetting all these other things in your life beyond the problems. And I hope that you can allow yourself to let this idea just settle in when you rest, and let it integrate into your personality. Even when you go to sleep tonight, just let it start to settle in and integrate into your total personality. Even if it's just small bits, it could make a massive difference in your life if you start to get it. you know. And once you know this stuff, it's very difficult to forget it. And I hope this helps you. And I hope it builds up momentum. And I hope the next podcast that I do expand on this principle. I don't want to give you any techniques to do. You can go to my other channel for those techniques if you want. They're pretty cool. And there's certain reasons why they will work for some people and not other people. And we might talk about that someday. And I want you to get this way of thinking and start to let it sink in and start to share this with other people. And thank you for even listening to this particular podcast. And I hope you get something from it. I hope it helps you at some level, and I hope it helps you to feel a little bit better. And join me and subscribe to my podcast and follow me on this channel if you want to learn how to do less stress and to feel better. And all you have to do is just listen and let your mind do the rest. And thank you for watching. I'm Paul Campbell.